guys, it's Ashley, and today I'm doing a video on how I draw braids. I know for some people drawing hair can be quite a nightmare, especially if you're just starting to learn how to draw. So in this, I show how to draw 3 different styled braids that I find are pretty popular and easy to do, and hopefully you'll find it helpful. So for the first one, it's just a simple fishtail braid, and I start off by mapping out the shapes of the braid, which in this case are quite tight. You can make the shapes of each braid for this one a bit thinner, depending on your desired look, as fishtail braids are meant to look tight, but for this tutorial I chose to stick with a somewhat moderate size. Also, the individual shapes are quite a skewed sort of almond shape that angle down from the top, and each braid is connected, which forms quite a distinct center line within the braid. So with this, I just continue down the braid until I reach a desired length and then just taper it off at the end. When shading braids, I tend to do each segment individually, showing the direction that the hair strands are going so that it looks more realistic. To do that, I start at the edges of each segment, and with a backwards and forwards motion, I draw in the strands of hair quite dark from the edges that then get lighter coming into the center of the segment. I also add a few lighter strands throughout the segments that cross the center to make it look a bit more realistic. I then continue this down the braid until all segments are complete. With this method, however, I feel it looks a bit harsh, so I tend to use a tortillon, I think that's how you pronounce it, just to smooth everything over and make the shadows and highlighting of the segment look a bit nicer. You can also use a paper stump. They're pretty similar, and for me, I find do the same job where I've used them, but it's up to you. For the second braid, I chose to draw a 3-strand braid as it's probably the most common braid. With this braid, the segments curve around each other, so a zigzag pattern is formed down the center as compared to the straight line of the fishtail braid. I just then continue these segments down the braid until I reach the length I want, and then again taper it off. When I taper it off, I add some loose strands coming off the hair under the hair tie, just to make it look a bit nicer and realistic. The shape kind of looks like an upside down raindrop that's curved at the top, I guess, if that helps. Once I've mapped out the braid, I shade each segment using the same concepts as I did with the fishtail braid, but with this one they tend to be a bit more curved as the segments aren't as straight as the fishtail ones, and I just continue this down the braid. With the 3-stranded braid, I decided to show it 2 ways. First, the way you just saw was how I normally draw it, but I also thought it would be helpful showing it this way as well, as it might be a bit easier to grasp and draw. With this one, you map out the area of the braid by using a ruler to create a V shape depending on the thickness of the braid. You then create the zigzag pattern by drawing the lines coming off each side and curving them off to create the segments, and then repeating this for the rest of the braid. Personally, I prefer my method, but I think if you're a beginner and just learning, then this would definitely be helpful, just to remember to keep the zigzag pattern with the 3-stranded braids. The shading of the segments for this one is just the same as the other 2, where I come off from the edges darker and have the center as close to white so that it is lighter for highlighting, and then use the tortillon to blend and make everything look smoother. For the last braid, I decided to show a really loose braid that I would typically use mainly as a side braid. I think this braid just looks really casual and fun and is nice to play around with, as you can make it a bit messy. When mapping this one out, the segments are bigger than the other braids and don't stick to one set shape. To make a braid look loose, you alternate the shapes of the segments and make them quite large and curved, so you could apply these concepts to the other braids for a loose, messy braid look. There isn't really any set way for this one other than just doing what works for you and playing around a bit. For this one, the shading is just the same as the others. Just make sure to ensure the strands are clear and the shadowing and highlighting is good to make it more realistic. If you wanted to do these in color, you would just apply the same concept with the shadows and highlights, but use maybe 3 different colors where one is the base color, one is for highlighting, and one is for shadows. When doing dark brown hair with my Prisoner colors, I tend to use dark brown for the base, dark umber for the shadows, as black tends to be a bit too dark and doesn't really mix as nice, and ginger root as the highlight. I also tend to use light umber as well to blend everything and make everything look a little bit more smoother. So that's the end of the tutorial. Hopefully you found it helpful and can easily draw braids. Please be sure to give a thumbs up and subscribe if you enjoyed to see more videos. Also, you can follow me on Instagram at AshleySad0 for all my other artworks. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.